Good afternoon and welcome to our first ICE webinar of 2025. Today we are joined by Randy Parker, Lead MR Safety Officer at Corewell Health. Randy has over 10 years of MRI scanning experience and over 4 years of experience with duties and responsibilities as an MRI Safety Officer. So before I hand over to Randy, just a few reminders. 2025 ICE Expo, which will take place at the Rosen Plaza Hotel in Orlando, Florida next month, will be February the 22nd to the 24th. The Imaging Conference and Expo is the only conference dedicated to imaging directors, radiology administrators, and imaging engineers. ICE offers valuable CE credits from the ASRT and ACI and is a unique community of key decision makers and influential imaging professionals. So for more details about the Expo, please visit attendice.com. Now, as usual, today's webinar is eligible for one Art Category A CE credit by the AHRA. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your one CE credit, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We'll be wrapping up today's presentation with a live Q&A, so please submit your questions anytime using the questions feature on the webinar dashboard. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our ICE gym bags to the attendee that can tell the answer to the following trivia question. January is National Blood Donor Month. What is the most common blood type? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard, and I'll reveal the answer at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, Randy is our presenter today, and he will be discussing financial support for a system-wide MRI safety program. It pays for itself. So Randy, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to start by sharing my appreciation for you logging on today and attending this webinar. If you're here, I'm assuming it's for one of two reasons. Either the safety of your patients and staff is a high priority for you, in which case you automatically earn my respect, or you saw this lecture about safety as your best chance of snagging a mid-afternoon power nap. Regardless, thank you for being here. Let's get started. So as I said, my name is Randy. I am the lead MRI safety officer at Corewell Health West. I've been certified as an MR safety officer through the American Board of Magnetic Resonance Safety since 2019. And I'm also a member of the International Panel of Experts for Care Reporting. By the end of this talk, my intent is for you to be able to identify key components to align with best practices to provide MRIs safely, describe how a rigorous screening and coordination process for MRI patients can be produced and optimized with the development of an effective MR safety program, explain the benefits of an effective and proactive safety program for a cost-conscious healthcare system, which who isn't nowadays, recognize the importance of collaboration in problem solving and the role effective communication plays in the safety of environment, and then also recognize multiple ways patients may benefit from a healthcare system's MRI safety program. With that said, for today's agenda, we will define a few key MRI safety roles. We'll discuss some MRI safety education. I'll provide a kind of a high-level overview and also say why it's important. We'll discuss patient screening with an established MRI safety program, and again, go into the benefits of having a safety program set up. And then we will, as you know, we're going to have a section at the end for questions. So please hold any questions that you have until then, or put them in the chat, as I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. All right, so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to survey the audience. There is a QR code on the left of your screen. If you're able to get out your phone and you can use your camera to scan that QR code, and it will take you to the questions. Yeah, I know. Wait a minute. Didn't he just say no questions until the end? Well, yes, I did, but I didn't say anything about me not being able to ask you questions. Don't worry, it's only 3 of them. All right. So while you're finishing up those questions, I'd like to introduce some key roles that you'll want to consider for your own MRI safety program for your sites. These roles were first established and defined in 2014. They became board certifiable titles shortly after when the American Board of Magnetic Resonance Safety, or ABMRS, was established. Since then, I believe somewhere around 9,000 MRI professionals have been certified for at least one of the top 3 roles. These individuals are the subject matter experts that are crucial to your program. The Safety Association, or the Safety Associate, is not an official name, but one that my organization uses when referring to certain technologists, and I'll explain that shortly. So here's an example of an institution that has a system-wide MRI safety program. There may be different variations of the structure, but this is how we've established it at my institution, Corewell Health. In an effort to meet the needs of our diverse patient population, many of which are underserved due to their implanted complex medical implants, this list of experts in the middle column here was established to create, implement, and maintain necessary policies and procedures based on or directly derived from best practices named in sources, such as the ACR manual on MR safety. You can also find what your leader's role may be in the program as a radiology administrator. Many of our radiology leaders are members of what we call in our system the expert improvement team. There's also subcommittees in different branches of our system. Similar to a committee or a subgroup with focus on MR safety driven operations within their respective departments. A few critical components to reducing adverse events in MRI are proper physical layout or zoning, access control, education, and proper patient screening. These components can be challenged by an increased demand for MRI services, as well as the number and complexity of implanted medical devices that are out there. So what is an MRI safety officer? Well, it's often a MRI tech. It's a role that an MRI tech takes, but it doesn't have to be. As a matter of fact, the only certification that requires any primary licensure is the medical director. They have to be a licensed physician. Otherwise, anyone can get trained and certified as an MRI safety officer or MR safety expert, which I'll talk about next. The MR safety officer for a given healthcare system is appointed by the MRMD to oversee safety of daily operations, policies, and procedures within their facility or facilities. They work in conjunction with radiology leadership, nursing, facilities, and any other departments that may be in relation with or may work with the MRI department. You can also have multiple MRSOs for a given facility or a given hospital system, but it is recommended that you establish a lead MRSO so that the MR safety medical director does have a point person to directly communicate with. So with that, the MR safety medical director is often a radiologist with extensive knowledge in MRI safety. They assume the overall responsibilities of the operations for a given MRI facility. They are, quote unquote, the captain of the ship. They ensure safe execution of all MRI exams, and they are responsible for developing and implementing and maintaining policies and procedures pertaining to those safe operations. Now, an MR safety expert, this is often a physicist. Again, doesn't have to be, according to the ABMRS. It is, while the MRSO and the MRMD serve as more direct roles with the facility, this can be more of an advisory role, specifically to the MRMD or the MRSO, or to the MRI staff as well. What this MR safety expert does as well is they quantify data of the energy, the force, the risk exposures that were related to non-routine MRI procedures. So if you're needing assistance with getting clarification or to better understand what the risks of doing a non-conventional MRI procedure is, say if a patient has a non-FDA approved implant or something like that, and you're having to do a risk assessment, these folks are really vital in providing some great information for you to consider. They also will assist in root cause analysis if there is an adverse event that occurs. They're also really vital in those discussions as well. And finally, just with any other MRI physicist in the department, they provide the QA testing and acceptance for MRI equipment in your area. Now, the MR Safety Associate, again, that is a term that is just utilized by my institution. That is not an official term. What it is basically we recognize an MRI tech that has special interests or aptitude for MR safety in a given facility. They may or may not be certified as an MRSO, but they often work in concert with the lead MRSOs. So the goal is to have at least one of these people at any given MRI institution. So if, like myself, is the lead MRSO, I oversee 17 MRI locations. So I essentially have 16 or 17, direct points of contact between myself and that given and each facility. So if they're not MRSOs, they're MR Safety Associates. Another task that they have is to ensure the daily operations and policy compliance with at their designated MRI location as it's implemented by the MRMD, MRSC, and also, of course, following the radiology administrative protocols as well. All right. Uh-oh. Let's see if I can fix that. Just a second here. So while we're working on that, so what we want to do is just review the responses to the safety question. And so let me just see if we can just go back. So we see we do have some responses in there. So let's see if we can just go back one slide and then go back into it. All right. So get this pulled up here. We'll move on to the next slide. We'll be able to, there's going to be a couple of spots in this lecture where we can go back and look at the answers to questions. And so if we can't get this pulled up here, then we'll just go ahead and try to review it when we get to the next point in our lecture. Try one more time. Nope, okay, that's fine. All right, so the next important thing to have in an MRI safety program is education. Nearly 100% of all MRI-related incidences that have occurred are the product of a lack of a few things. Education on the risks of MRI, the application of that knowledge, i.e. the mitigation, and access control and supervision. Unfortunately, it was a lapse in those few things that resulted in perhaps the most infamous MRI accident to date, a ferromagnetic oxygen cylinder that was brought into the magnet room, and after only being carried a few feet into the room, went flying into the MRI machine. There was a 6-year-old boy that was positioned in that MRI machine who had just been sedated a short time earlier and was ready for his last post-op MRI of his brain before he and his family could finally be discharged home. The force that caused that cylinder to go flying into the scanner is called translational force, but it's nicknamed missile effect. That name was inspired by what a ferromagnetic tank resembles if it becomes attracted to an MRI machine. Unfortunately, it was that force that caused what would end up being the fatal injuries to that 6-year-old boy whose name was Michael Colombini. This happened on July 27th, 2001. This event sent shockwaves through the radiology community and sparked an unprecedented awareness for the safety risks of MRI. It seemed that people outside of the community of physicists and engineers and research scientists were realizing that just because MRI exposure cannot give you cancer doesn't mean that it's completely benign. From there, the American College of Radiology got to work, understanding the risks of MRI and the ways to mitigate them. In June 2002, the ACR put together a blue ribbon panel and published their first white paper on MRI safety. This was the first attempt to standardize MR safety practices for any given MRI facility. Essentially, the goal was to make sure that nothing like the Columbini incident could happen again. In order to ensure the safety of our patients, coworkers, and ourselves, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Unlike most other diagnostic imaging modalities that simply use one energy source, MRI actually uses three: the static field, the radio frequency or RF field, and the time varying gradient field. Now, they're all electromagnetic fields, but operate at different frequencies, and therefore they pose different risks that are unique to each energy. This is a breakdown of the three energies of MRI and the risks associated with them. Notice how there isn't much overlap. Essentially, no two energies share the same risk, but they're all present simultaneously during an MRI procedure. Actually, 1/3 of these risks are present before an MRI is even performed. In fact, those risks are present 24/7, 365 days a year, and those are associated with the static magnetic field. Static, it's called that because it is ever present, essentially unchanged. Now, it's important to understand each energy or flashlight for many reasons, but a study performed in 2018 exemplified that importance. In the study, they retrospectively reviewed MRI events that were reported to the FDA over a 10-year period, and from 2008 through 2017, they found that 1,568 events were reported. What they discovered was that the top three most reported events were directly related to each flashlight, and they are thermal injuries or burns, which is a direct correlation with the radio frequency or RF field, projectiles, when something gets attracted to the scanner, like an oxygen tank, that is the result of exposure to the static magnetic field, and then hearing loss or hearing damage. The noise that an MRI machine is known for, that is actually caused by the time varying gradient field. Now, MRI is widely considered a safe imaging modality because we do not use ionizing radiation to obtain images, and there's no known physical effects from repeat MRI exposure. You're not going to start sticking to your fridge at home or suddenly develop telekinesis after so many MRIs. Charles Xavier isn't going to come knocking on your door asking you to join the X-Men. Unfortunately, I've still been waiting. So why is it important to establish an MRI safety program at your facility? Well, it's vitally important that we acknowledge the very real risks associated with the powerful magnetic fields used in MRI and establish policies and procedures to help mitigate adverse events directly associated with it. Here's an article describing a survey that was conducted in 2018 by a company called MetroSense. They polled some 160 MRI professionals, which revealed that about 1/3 of the MRI facilities failed to meet the minimum best practice standards recognized by the Joint Commission. Notice how I use the word recognized. Surely we're safe now, right? We had a tragic death that occurred in 2001 that sparked immediate action to be taken. And by the summer of 2002, we were learning about numerous best practices to help prevent what we found out to at least be 80% of adverse events that occur in MRI, if not more. In the years since 2001, patient safety organizations accrediting healthcare facilities such as the Joint Commission, the ACR, the IAC, etc. They've recognized and required the following best practices. Not a single one. In fact, most of the pictures that you are about and headlines that you're about to see are just from 2023. The one in the top left there, that actually occurred in 2022, but was still catching headlines in late 2023. This was a very well-publicized incident out in California where a nurse was severely injured. And here is just a handful of other incidences that we were made aware of in 2023. Another image of the incident that injured the nurse. Yeah, you may be asking this question. Okay, are we done yet? Are we there yet? Not quite, unfortunately. This one was especially interesting. Check out the MRI safe sticker that was applied to that one. And lastly, 2024 couldn't go unnoticed either. This one actually just occurred last summer. And there's a picture of that incident. With zero to very minimal government or agency regulation requirements focused specifically on MRI safety, it is essentially left up to the facility and its team to implement best practices that will prevent incidences like this from happening. It's up to you to establish a culture of safety within the MRI department. There we go. All right, so let's take a peek at question 1. So the first question was, do you currently employ any individuals as a dedicated MRSO or MRMD at your institution? Looks like we're about half and half, yes and no. 11% saying MRSO only. So it is really important that you have these people established. These are truly the content experts that are going to really help strengthen your program and also increase access for your patients. And we'll talk more about that shortly, but it's really great to see that we're at least approaching that 50% mark. All right, now let's look at question 2. Are your patients screened for any implants or metal foreign bodies when they schedule an MRI exam? And an overwhelming majority of you say yes, 94%. That is fantastic. So I'm sure that we can all agree that early screening is the best way to go, but some MRI sites still simply just schedule the MRI appointment without asking the patient a single thing when it comes to implants or metal injuries. There are multiple reasons that to perform at least an abbreviated version of this screening when the MRI is being scheduled. This leads us to the next section of today's talk. MRI patient screening with an established safety program. So what do we mean when we say patient screening? Well, this slide provides a very brief overview of the recommended screening process that is more thoroughly described in the ACR manual on MRI safety. Essentially, from the time the MRI order is placed to when the patient enters zone 3, also known as the MRI control room, there should be a minimum of 2 rounds of screening for unsafe loose metals, objects, foreign bodies, and implants, with the final round being conducted by the MRI tech. This is a great quote by world-renowned expert in MRI safety, Bill Faulkner. This is saying that while the technologist is, without a doubt, the most vital role in protecting the MRI department, the more proactive and supportive a facility can be, the stronger that protection is going to be. So what are we screening for? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the amount and the complexity of implanted devices is growing rapidly. And while it's important to obtain history regarding any and all metallic or conductive foreign bodies, there are certain implants that can directly impact when, where, if, and how a patient may safely undergo an MRI. Things like pacemakers, programmable shunts, cochlear implants, metallic foreign bodies like BBs or other shrapnel, as well as a plethora of nerve stimulation implants. You can get an implant nowadays implanted from literally the top of your head down through your ankle. Many of these implants not only require strict conditions to be adhered to if they're approved for MRI imaging by the MRI technologist, but also they require, some of them require ancillary assistance from a vendor or maybe a physician in order for the patient to be safely scanned. Now, as you can see from these projection models, the uses of devices like pacemakers, defibrillators, and nerve stimulators are only expected to increase over time. You can also find a similar linear increase in the use of MRI imaging. The complexity of these implants, as well as the deceptive complexity, we'll call it, of how MRI works, makes having a thorough and robust MRI screening program increasingly important, given their increased usage in the patient population. I don't want you to take anything on this slide from, or any like dollar amounts or numbers or anything like that from this slide. Really, the graphs are just meant to show the expected linear increase in these types of implants. So essentially, if your site isn't seeing them now, there's a good chance that in the somewhat near future, you will start to see patients with them. And that brings me to this slide. So this is a study that was performed by the MRI sites at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center back in 2018. This slide was graciously provided to me by Dr. Emmanuel Canal. So that's their head radiologist over there. And what he did is he asked the techs to simply document every time a patient arrived in their department with something either on or in them that caused the appointment to be paused in order to research an implant or consult a radiologist or look at prior imaging, call a vendor to get, if the device was MR conditional, get the conditions, anything that caused a delay, whether the patient, stayed there that day or had to get rescheduled. The study was done over a 2-week period, and their techs had to pause, nearly 40% in total. Now, my previous slide and just simple experience in the field would suggest that if Dr. Canal was to perform this same study with techs today, that percentage would almost certainly be higher without implementing proactive screening for these devices. So some of the biggest problems that we face are patient safety issues and patient dissatisfaction. These often look like last-minute appointment cancellations, or they're finding out too late in the process, often upon arrival, that there's some factor which causes the patient to not be scanned that day. In addition to a likely upset patient, this causes a loss of revenue on our side of things. However, in the past, these things weren't caught, which allows the worst possible outcome for anyone, which is an adverse event, or what my institution calls a Zone 4 infraction. Now, bear with me on this slide, and hopefully you can see the little text okay. So this is a visualization of the total number of MRI referrals at my institution for 2023. This breaks down how many were sent through for an MRI safety review. Of the over 86,000 MRI referrals that were screened, approximately 20%, or 17,000, were flagged for a safety review. Of that 20%, over 14,000 of the reviews performed were deemed acceptable to schedule without limitations. Yeah, sure, go ahead, anywhere, anytime, doesn't matter what scanner you go to. On the flip side of that, over 2,300 patients, or about 14% of the total safety reviews that were done, were deemed to have more complex implants, were either deemed okay to be scanned, but they had one of those devices that I had mentioned earlier that need to be done at certain locations or require a vendor or a physician, or they have a device or a metal injury that's actually deemed contraindicated for that particular MRI order. So that's 14% for 2023, but just as an aside, this percentage was about 12% in 2022. So this is better broken up. This percentage is better broken down and visualized in the last 3 bubbles over here on the right. Now keep these bubbles in mind as we move forward to the next few slides. Now, what happens if a patient is deemed essentially unsafe for a requested MRI? Well, first the provider is contacted and made aware. They often they're offered to contact a radiologist to discuss alternative imaging options. At which time the provider can place that order and cancel the MRI. And performing these tasks prior to the patient's MRI being scheduled has multiple benefits. For the imaging site, this means a spot in their schedule is not filled with an inappropriate or unsafe patient, causing the site to turn a patient away at the last minute, or at worst, it places the site at undue risk for having an adverse event. As a result, the scheduling template for a given MRI site can be optimized by filling it with patients that are more than likely to receive their MRIs on the date and time that they were originally scheduled. And just to note, when we do accept a patient with an implant that can only be scanned at certain sites, clear comments and directions are provided to the scheduling team so that they can easily identify and carry out the scheduling of the patient appropriately. We also provide our technologists with clear guidelines to follow to stay within the conditions of the implant. So when the patient shows up, they should have what protocol they need to scan and any directions they need to follow regarding an implant to make sure that the patient is scanned safely. Communication is key. Oh, darn it. Let's see. Hopefully that'll work again, but if it doesn't, that's okay. All right, so this question was asking about, let's see if I can access this another way really quickly. Oops, not there. So let's see here. All right. So I do have some results here that I can at least see on my end. So the third question is, in your opinion, what is the most likely reason to not create or strengthen an MRI safety program at a given facility? And a resounding 79% of the people who voted said the cost of training or labor. That is very interesting. This next section of this presentation may be of particular interest to those people. So I also made mention of one benefit being time slot optimization. MRI is still one of the more profitable services for a hospital system, particularly for outpatient studies. So it may go without saying that to having to cancel a patient at the last minute, resulting in an unused time slot, can have financial consequences. Well, how much consequence? We set out to answer that question. We consulted an internal financial analyst within my hospital system, and essentially we wanted to know what is an MRI time slot worth. The value was calculated using the average reimbursement at a given location within our system receives for an MRI exam. And this includes the average of CMS and all accepted commercial or private insurers as well. We called this the total margin loss avoidance, or TMLA. Here's a graphical representation of those numbers from 2023, as well as the assigned TMLA for each category. As you can see, the 86% that were cleared to schedule without any conditions or limitations, they had a TMLA of 0, since the patients would be projected to show up and complete their MRI. So therefore, the facility wouldn't lose anything. The green category is the 11% of the total, or I'm sorry, about 11% of the total 17,000 patients who received a safety review and were allowed to proceed, but they needed to be scheduled at specific locations, maybe needed assistance from a vendor or a physician. Essentially, if the patients were to show up at any of our regional or ambulatory locations where we don't have the resources to accommodate certain implants, then they would be turned away because the site, again, wouldn't be able to accommodate them. They would have to reschedule to a different location within our system. The red category is the 3%, the remaining 3% 19,000. These ones were deemed contraindicated for that particular MRI. This could be a patient with an unsafe implant, shrapnel in a sensitive location, or simply the implant was contraindicated for the requested scan, like if an MRI of the spine was ordered, but the patient's implant is only conditional for head scans. This report here shows all three categories together. Again, the 86% in blue contributes nothing to the TMLA, meaning that just by catching that 14% of patients that were either contraindicated or had some strict conditions or limitations that we had to follow, which, by the way, is still a mere 2.5% of the total referrals for 2023, we were able to show a financial savings within our system of over $1.5 million. So what this means is that by doing that proactive screening and optimizing our scheduling templates, by clearing these patients before they get scheduled to avoid those last minute cancellations, essentially, you know, this is like a worst case scenario. This is not an actual amount that was, you know, saved. This was like a worst case scenario. If all of these 14% of patients showed up without any screening prior to, and they showed up at the wrong location, this is what we're projecting that we would have saved our system. Now, another way to look at this is since not everyone has the luxury of having a fleet of 21 MRI machines at their disposal, let's break these numbers down further into what this equates to per scanner. So if we take the 2,300 referrals or orders that represents the 14% of our screened patients for 2023 and divide that by 21, that comes out to about 112 orders per scanner. Furthermore, if we just look at the screened patients for more complex medical implants, this represents just under 1,900 of the total referrals or orders. So now you can also turn this data on its head to say that by accepting patients with these implants, so just this 11%, is literally making your organization a significant amount of money, you know, just based off of our numbers, over 1.2 million in 2023. I should clarify that only approximately about 9 of our MRI machines could potentially scan these patients. So for the sake of accuracy, let's divide these orders by 9. So almost 1,900 orders divided by 9. This equals about 210 orders per scanner, or a generated revenue of about $138,000 annually. This is not theoretical. This is actual revenue gained by accepting these complex patients. Also bear in mind that these dollar amounts will likely vary depending on your location and insurance providers that you accept. You know, it could perhaps be even higher than what I'm showing here today. For some perspective, here's the average annual salary for an MRI safety officer according to ZipRecruiter as of this month. Now, let's say I was given the top earner salary. Essentially, you know, I'm not getting that amount, but let's dream, shall we? Let me have this. Essentially, we'll be able to show that by performing the proactive screening and optimization of your patient schedules, you could pay for an MRSO salary 15 times over. Another way to look at this is to ask, how many patients is an MRSO position worth? Well, we can use the data that we got from our internal financial analyst to get a sense of what the ballpark number would be. Let's take the $840 average reimbursement from insurance. And again, this is just within our system for performing MRIs at a hospital site. This is the most reliable approach because nearly all of the implants that are factored in with this report must be scanned at a hospital site. Then it's just simple math. So you have 120K divided by 840 equals around 121 patients. Here's an excerpt from our database that suggests a fairly similar metric, but this does not include the couple of devices that can be scanned at our regional locations, which does have a lower average reimbursement of about $360 that we found. Regardless, even if you're a small facility with just one MRI scanner, you can probably say with confidence that you would see more than 121 patients with complex implants per year. Thankfully, to even sweeten the deal even more, it would seem that having a program with a dedicated MR safety roles is also catching the attention at the federal level. Thanks to the American College of Radiology and CMS, there are now CPT codes that specifically reflect works dedicated to MRI safety. These went into effect on January 1st of this year. And while there are some conditions to follow, these codes allow an MRI facility to bill for virtually everything I've laid out for you today. As Lizzo would say, it's about dang time. By this point, we've already justified your investment in the dedicated MRI safety roles, proactive screening processes, and other resources needed to accommodate our patients with complex medical implants. But let's take a look at some additional benefits of an MRI safety program. So we've maximized access to MRI for patients with both within and outside of our hospital system. We've actually at Corewell, we've had several patients get referred to us from other systems because we do things that we scan implants that some other places won't touch. We saw great cost savings based on efficient slot usage, and we created standard safety processes to use across our entire system. So MRI safety pays dividends in both safety and efficiency when you set it up like this. And what we have found is that adopting an MRI safety program can highlight areas for improvement as well. And this whole process allows us to learn lessons which have resulted in less adverse events or zone-borne infractions within our system, as well as an increase in good catches by our MRI teams. It's also worth mentioning that the subject matter experts that you would employ with a program, the MRMD, the MRSO, the MRSC, they help increase efficiency as well because they may find that there are certain things that are currently researched right now as far as implants that maybe don't need to be just generally speaking. So they may be able to help reduce unnecessary safety reviews for certain devices. Another additional benefit to dedicating resources to MRI safety is what they can do for from a facilities enhancement standpoint. So this picture here is a anesthesia cart that is currently stuck to one of our MRI machines. This event happened in January of 2015. And this is a picture of what the kind of the breezeway, the transport path into zone 4 looked like. So you have this narrow hallway here, and then you have this door open into zone 3, and just 9 feet later, bam, you're walking into zone 4. And there was a lot of complex patients that were scanned in this space. And so there was a lot of stuff that was going on in the hallways, like, critical patient transfers, different things like that. And so it just did not make for a very safe environment. This is the new MRI suite at the same facility that went live, I believe it was in the end of 2023, 2022. So this is the new holding area. It's got a new holding area. It's got 3 bays for inpatients. It's got ample amount of patient interview rooms and also a dedicated area for metal screening. And then you can see the doors there that opened into zone 3. And it does have 2 MRI suites, so there are 2 control rooms there, but it is technically shared, but they can be divided by that barn door type of door in there. So since this has gone live, There have been numerous benefits and numerous good catches. There's way less concern for safety incidences occurring at this facility. And it now also finally meets the ACR standards that are set for facilities. Here's another one. This is at our Corewell Pennock location in Hastings, Michigan. And this actually went live just a couple of weeks ago. So this site in particular was of a concern for us because the scanner was much older. They had a lot of limitations as far as the MRI services that they could provide, but also they had the pathway or the zones were improper. You could actually directly have direct access into zone 4 from the zone 2 area. And so that presented essentially a safety event just waiting to happen. And now, thankfully, they have proper zonage set up through the according to the ACR. So now we have a proper zone 2 and proper zone 3, where zone 4 is only accessed from the zone 3 area. So some additional benefits is MRI safety education, MRI safety awareness. Content is provided in orientation and also on an annual basis for all of our direct and indirect patient-facing employees. There's customized level 1 and level 2 training modules for our MR personnel. And I've, as the lead MRI safety officer, I've had a very heavy hand in creating that content. And then we also perform in-person safety demonstrations for new MRI hires, which has been very, very well received. And then furthermore, we've taken it a step further, and we actually have a ARRT approved post-primary certification training program in MRI for internal radiology employees to cross-train into MRI. So on top of a MRSC and an MRSO, we also have internal imaging specialists. All of us as a team, we provide the courses that are needed for this training program, and essentially we're able to provide 20 category A CE credits because this is also offered to established, already certified MRI employees as well. And then one additional thing that we provide our MRI teams is a monthly newsletter for all of our technologists and our leadership. And we actually just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of that newsletter last month. So despite what some may think, MRI safety is patient focused. In my role as a system MRSO, I have to be patient focused. Think about it. I'm one of the players who has a role in just about every stage in the patient experience, from the time they schedule their MRI until the time that they leave the MRI department after their exam. In some cases, we don't just play a role, but we have a hand in how that story is written. So I take patient care and patient satisfaction very seriously. Some may look at some of the practices described in this presentation as potential barriers or roadblocks to get patients through their facilities. But in my opinion, you need an MRI safety program in order to do just the opposite. As world-renowned MRI safety champion Dr. Manny Canal says, it's very easy to say no. To say yes requires knowledge, understanding of that knowledge, and the willingness to apply it. He'll tell you every day of the week that he is not passionate about MRI safety. He is passionate about patient care. That is a pillar of why MRI safety education exists and why it's so important that our MRI service provider has a strong MR safety program. Some other considerations for investing in MRI safety: can you afford not to? This is an article that came out less than a year ago that describes a lawsuit in which a patient underwent an MRI for a hand injury and suffered what turned out to be permanent hearing loss. And they settled for $1.5 million. If you remember, what was the total margin loss avoidance that my system was able to show by having a proactive screening process for 2023? It was just over $1.5 million for that 1 year alone. Another thing to consider is that malpractice works both ways. Courts have ruled against MRI providers for imaging patients when they should not have, but also for not imaging patients when they could have. Now, as you go start developing and applying resources for your own MRI safety program at your facilities, I want to leave you with this cautionary quote. Success breeds complacency. Complacency breeds failure. Only the paranoid survive. One of my directors made a comment a couple of years ago that raised a bit of a red flag for me. When discussing the surge of projectile events that were occurring just around the country in the spring of 2023, they said, well, I think we're beyond having to worry about something like a hospital bed ending up in our zone 4. I initially recognized that as a vote of confidence in the success that we've had in our MR safety standards within our departments, as I'm certain that's how the comment was intended. But then that sense of pride quickly turned to concern. I realized that this line of thinking can be just as dangerous as having no regard for MRI safety at all. So hopefully we can all stay paranoid. I want to thank the ICE magazine for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you all very much for your time and your attention. Should you have any further questions for me after we're done today with the Q&A, or would like to simply discuss this presentation further, please scan the QR code here, which will direct you to my email address. I could talk MRI safety for the rest of the afternoon if you let me, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions that have actually come in. The first one is, what process did you use to gather your data for cases identified with concerns?
Well, we utilize Epic, and so if we're talking about just kind of the filters that we used to kind of weed out the ones that needed a safety review, we utilize Epic. There's ways that you can build Epic to have a work queue or a status board created with a list of patients that when the scheduler answers a question in a certain way, so like if the scheduler asks the patient, do you have a pacemaker? And the patient answers yes. When they select yes, that drives that patient to the work queue that yourself or your MRI safety team would monitor. And it's live in the moment, refreshes, every minute or so, or pretty much on demand. So that is kind of the main way that we've gone through and kind of filtered those out. This works for, you can set it up a couple of different ways. You can use the scheduling decision tree to some extent, but we also utilize the electronic MRI screening form. There's rules that you can create within that to where a yes answer would prompt that patient to go to this work list for a safety review. So I hope that answers your question.
Perfect. Another question here is, does your darker grey flooring on your new scanner represent a specific gauge line?
It does, yes. Yeah, that's a good notice. Yes, it does. It does represent the 5 Gauss line. So we are just maintaining, I know that the ACR is now revised it to be the 9 Gauss line is what needs to be marked, but we're still maintaining the 5 Gauss line for now. There's no real advantage to, at least at our facilities, to changing that. So yes, they are directly color coordinated based on the Gauss for the static magnetic field.
Okay, another question here is, for Zone 3 office chairs, do you tether them or only use MRI safe chairs?
We do use MR unsafe chairs. We tether them when we have a mobile unit, but for, other than that, they are not tethered. That is not a bad idea. But we do utilize very large MRI unsafe labeling that is attached to those chairs. And it is something that is educated to every single MRI tech that works at our facilities, that they know for certain any chair that is in their zone 3 is not MRI safe. We do utilize MR safe stools or chairs inside zone 4 should there need to be a visitor or like a parent or guardian to stay in the zone 4 with the patient to help get them through the exam, or if a physician or somebody needs to stay in there, then we usually have 1 or 2 MRI safe chairs in there, but typically in zone 3 they are MR unsafe and clearly labeled as such.
Perfect. Another question here is, has your facility allowed the MRSO to interrogate conditional devices site-wide, allowing for even remote clinics to safely scan conditional devices such as DBS or spine stim?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So typically, the role within the role of the MRSO within our system is not typically doing that on a regular basis. I have participated in a couple of interrogations with the assistance of a vendor rep over the phone, but they were for very special types of stimulation devices. I have assisted with those things before. For the most part, when we're talking about spinal stimulators, deep brain stimulators, things where the patient could come in with a remote, or they're able, the vendor is able to do something remotely, we have created aid, like kind of job aid documents for the technologists at the location to have. And that's not necessarily for them to do all the work themselves, but to help the patient through it, particularly with things like stimulators. When you put them into MRI mode, at least at my institution, and I'm well aware of others where that's typically, the responsibility of doing that is on the patient, but you have these devices put in you're woken up from anesthesia, you're in PACU, and this rep comes down and gives you a remote and a booklet and all this other stuff and kind of talks you through how to use it. And again, you're still kind of groggy from anesthesia, and then you go home and you maybe need an MRI a year down the road. Are you really going to remember what you were told that day when you were sitting in PACU, still drugged up from anesthesia? So that's kind of a big thing that we run into, and I know a lot of other facilities do as well, is the amount of patients that come in and don't know how to use their programmer. And so what we've done at our institution is we've created job aids for the technologists to have. They can print them off, they can have them in the area, they can show them to the patient, and it's very step-by-step instructions on how to put their device into MRI mode. And then the technologist will verify that that process has been done before they put them in zone 4.
Okay, we've got time for about one more question, Randy. Can you repeat the estimated number of ABMRS certified MRSO, MRMD, MRSE?
The number of them, yeah, I think it's somewhere, last I heard, for all 3 of them, according to the ABMRS, it's somewhere around 9,000. I think it may be creeping up over closer to 10,000 now. But that's the amount that I had heard for the entire organization, or for the entire ABMRS certified personnel. Now, if we're talking about Corewell, if we're talking about my Corewell West specifically, within my institution, we currently have 5 certified MRSOs. I'm the lead MRSO, so I'm the only one that's full-time doing this work. The other MRSOs are also scanning techs, but we are growing that number. And actually, we've used this data to get approval to get a significant amount of more techs certified and be able to financially support them getting certified, helping to pay for the registration for the exam, the training materials that they want to use to prepare for the exam, sending them to conferences. That is all that can all be easily approved by the data that I showed today.
Perfect. We've got time just to squeeze one more in. Have
Sure.
you created a workflow to capture the new CPT codes charges?
I would love to say yes, but 3 weeks into the year. I have been working with our internal revenue analysts, the ones that I had mentioned earlier that helped me get these numbers. I've been working with them since the middle of November to try to get this established. And the reason that it's taking so long for us is because we can really utilize just about every CPT code that's available. So that's kind of what's making it a really complex thing. We're we're looking at several different options, looking at using a third party organization to assist with the written documentation and things like that. So no, we have not fully implemented it yet, but we are working hard to do so.
That's great. Well, we've come up to our hour, Randy. So thank you so much for your time today and such a great presentation. As promised, the answer to today's trivia question is O positive. So congratulations to our winner, Andrea Wagner in West Virginia. Now, just a quick reminder, you can attain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your ARRT Category A CE credit by the AHRA, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Please visit icewebinars.live for more details of all our upcoming ICE webinars and, of course, complimentary registration. If you've missed any of our past ICE webinars, please visit icewebinars.live to view our whole webinar archive. Thank you all for your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.